If you died today, would your soul be aligned or entangled in distractions? Not tomorrow. Not in a hypothetical future where you've read the books, healed the wounds, meditated enough, or finally reached that elusive sense of wholeness. No. Today. As you are. In this very breath. In this exact moment. Would you leave this life feeling that you honored what was most sacred in you? Or would you depart with 1,000 open tabs in your mind and a silence in your chest where your soul should have been leading? This isn't a question designed to scare you. It's not morbid and it's not dramatic. It's an opening, a quantum slit, a microsecond collapse of all illusions so that something real can emerge. Clarity. There is no greater mirror than death. And when we look into it consciously, what we see is not the end. We see the truth of how we've lived. And perhaps more painfully, how much of ourselves we've abandoned in the name of survival, comfort, or control. The Stoics called this Memento Mori, not as a philosophy of despair, but as a compass for the soul. Marcus Aurelius didn't meditate on death to become cold. He did it to become fully alive. It is not death that man should fear, he said, but never beginning to live. The problem is that most people confuse existing with living. They breathe, they move, they perform, but they never once pause to ask, is this truly mine? Not the job, not the house, not the relationships, but the life, the rhythm, the energy, the alignment. Is this the frequency my soul came here to embody? Quantum physics teaches us that reality doesn't unfold in a straight line. It collapses. It chooses. Out of infinite possibilities, only one reality becomes actual when consciousness touches it. What if life works the same way? What if your soul is constantly hovering between timelines, and the direction it takes is not based on effort or chance, but resonance? If that's true, then your final moment, your last breath, won't be a dramatic ending, but the moment of highest vibrational reflection. You won't take with you what you achieved. You'll take with you what you embodied. This is why remembering death is the most powerful act of spiritual coherence. It instantly filters out the noise. It silences the ego's frantic chase for approval, for safety, for more. When you remember you are going to die, not someday, but potentially now, you begin to ask different questions. You stop obsessing over how can I get what I want, and you start asking what truly matters when all the wanting disappears. What remains when the masks drop, when the roles dissolve, when your name, your face, your social media presence, your identity are no longer relevant in the eternal field of consciousness. You begin to see that life was never about chasing external meaning. It was about inner alignment. It was about coherence, about resonance with the field of intelligence that spins galaxies and beats your heart without your permission. It was about becoming so clear, so centered, so vibrationally attuned that when your moment of transition arrives, and it will, you are not caught by surprise. You are not clinging to what was. You are ready, not because you were perfect, but because you were true. You were whole. You were aligned. You can call this the Logos. You can call it Source. You can call it God's soul or the quantum field. It doesn't matter. What matters is that there's a frequency underneath all the noise of your life that knows exactly who you are. And when you live in harmony with that frequency, your life begins to organize itself. Your choices shift, your perception sharpens, your relationships realign, and your nervous system starts whispering, yes, this is the way. That's what this video is about. Not death as fear, but death as a teacher, as a calibrator, as a vibrational checkpoint that asks, are you living aligned with what you say matters? Because if you're not, and you were to leave this body tonight, what would remain of you? A string of incomplete thoughts and borrowed dreams, or the silent knowing that you lived, truly lived, with your soul on the surface and nothing left in the vault. So let's begin where most avoid. Let's begin with the end, because only when we remember death can we truly begin to live, not on autopilot, not under illusion, but consciously, intentionally, authentically, aligned. The Stoic reminder, death as the compass of life. Death has never been the true enemy. The real enemy is postponement. the silent decision to keep your soul waiting until tomorrow. It is the unconscious habit of drifting through days, believing you have an infinite supply of them, while your deepest callings go unanswered. The Stoics never saw death as a morbid fixation, but as the ultimate mirror, the one reflection that refuses to flatter you. It strips away illusions. It shows you exactly where you stand. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but never beginning to live." Imagine an emperor writing these words at night in his tent, surrounded by the weight of armies and empire. His greatest fear was not assassination or betrayal, but the possibility of reaching his final breath without having truly inhabited his own life. This is the hidden heart of Stoicism. It isn't cold or detached. It is fiercely alive. It teaches you to hold each day as if it were your entire life compressed into 24 hours, and in doing so, it forces you to look at what is essential. Seneca observed that life is not short, but that we waste much of it. Not in idleness, but in scattering our energy over what does not matter. We say yes to every distraction. We bow to every urgency. We accumulate obligations and identities that don't belong to us. Meanwhile, time slides silently away. This is why the Stoics urged daily reflection on death, not to make life smaller, but to make it sharper, clearer, more honest. Epictetus, born a slave and later a teacher, compared life to a role in a play. "The script is not yours to write," he said, "but you can decide how to act it. If you are given the part of a beggar, play it well. If you are given the part of a king, play it well. When the director calls you off stage, do not cling. Leave with dignity." This is what Memento Mori means in its rawest form. Remember that the play will end. Act with grace before the curtain falls. What happens inside you when you begin to live as if each day could be your last? A certain honesty emerges, an honesty that has no patience for triviality. You stop lying to yourself about the job you hate, the relationship you outgrew, the habits that dull your spirit. You begin to measure your actions against a deeper question. Does this align with who I truly am? You notice how much of your time is consumed by trying to prove your worth to others, how often you exchange hours of your life for someone else's approval. Under the gaze of mortality, these games lose their hold. The flavor of gossip turns bitter. The thrill of winning fades. What once felt urgent now feels hollow. Only what is real remains. And this is the paradox. Remembering death does not make life darker. It makes life more vivid. Colors become brighter. Words weigh more. Touch feels electric. When you stop postponing your soul's work, you discover an intimacy with existence that cannot be faked. Marcus Aurelius did not meditate on death to become gloomy. He did it to become free. Seneca did not write about the brevity of life to frighten his students. He did it to awaken them. Epictetus did not speak of the playwright of the cosmos to create resignation. He spoke of it to teach resilience and dignity. They all understood something we keep forgetting. You cannot control the length of your life, but you can always control its depth. Memento Mori, then, is not a whisper about death, but a roar about life. It demands that you stop living on autopilot. It demands that you stop trading the hours of your existence for things that will not matter on your deathbed. It demands that you turn your gaze away from the illusion of endless tomorrows and into the sacred urgency of now. When you remember death, you recalibrate your attention. Your focus sharpens like a blade. The fog lifts. What your soul truly values rises to the surface, and in that clarity, freedom is born. You stop asking, "How much time do I have left?" and start asking, "How do I want to live this moment?" This single shift transforms not only your decisions, but your entire energetic signature. You begin to inhabit your own life instead of merely passing through it. So ask yourself, with brutal honesty, if this were your final sunrise, what in your life would still feel meaningful? What would instantly fall away? What conversations would you rush to have? What work would you stop postponing? What forgiveness would you offer? These questions are not theoretical. They are the compass points of a life aligned with the soul. When death becomes your compass, what remains is what has always mattered: your truth, your presence, your integrity, your love. To live under that compass, is not to be obsessed with dying, but to be obsessed with living fully. This is the heart of the Stoic reminder. This is the gateway through which ancient wisdom meets quantum reality, where each choice is a collapse of possibilities, and each moment is a chance to step into the version of yourself you will not regret when your final breath arrives. The illusion of time and the quantum collapse. Time, as we usually understand it, is a lie told gently. We treat it as linear, obedient, predictable, a river flowing from past to present to future. But this is not how reality operates at its most fundamental level. In quantum physics, all possible outcomes exist simultaneously in a field of probabilities until one is observed. Only then does the wave collapse into a particle, into form. And if life behaves like this, if every choice is the collapse of a potential into experience, then time is not a line. It's a stage where only the act of observation creates movement. You are not moving through time. You are moving through frequencies, and the one you choose determines what you perceive as your life. Seneca, centuries before any quantum theory, intuited the same truth. He said, "Life is long if you know how to use it." But what does that mean when we think we are merely passing through the days? It means time is not about quantity. It is about quality of presence. You can live 80 years and never touch your soul, or you can live a single year with such clarity and depth that it transforms generations. Time is not a gift granted in advance. It's a contract renewed by every conscious moment. And when you're unconscious, when you're lost in distraction, comparison, fear, or bitterness, that time isn't truly lived. It's archived as noise, not memory. It passes, but it doesn't leave impact. What you call your life is just the sequence of collapses you choose, which versions of yourself you animate with your attention. And death, in this model, is simply the final collapse, the last vibration, the sealing of your energetic imprint. There is something profoundly sobering in this. Every time you delay your authenticity, you delay your alignment. Every time you postpone truth, you alter the pattern of your own frequency. It's not about punishment. It's physics. Presence is the mechanism that brings potential into being. Avoidance does the opposite. The more you escape what matters, the more diluted your field becomes. And as your field dilutes, your capacity to manifest, to attract, to transform, weakens. So, the Stoic who remembers death daily is not being dark. He is being scientific. He is using the illusion of time as a spiritual and energetic tool to remind the soul that now is the only moment with creative power. Quantum mechanics confirms this in ways that mystics always suspected. Until an observation is made, a quantum particle exists in a state called superposition, all states at once, undefined. But once observed, the wave function collapses. The particle becomes something definite. Life follows this law. Your future is not unfolding in front of you. It is collapsing beneath your awareness. And the quality of your awareness, the emotional tone, the belief structure, the frequency of your presence, determines what collapses into experience. If you live in fear, the wave collapses into more reasons to fear. If you live in trust, life reveals order and meaning. If you live in gratitude, the field amplifies beauty. If you live in avoidance, your timeline shrinks into flatness. And what does this have to do with death? Everything. Because death is not an interruption of the timeline. It is the final observation, the moment when your entire field freezes into its final shape. The superposition ends. The you that you lived becomes the only version that existed in this dimension. The time you believed you had is no longer a probability. It is closed. And what remains is the echo of the frequency you carried. Memento Mori, seen through this lens, becomes a quantum principle. It is not about morbidity. It is about energetic precision. It's the practice of collapsing the timeline you actually want to leave behind, not the one you stumbled into. And you do this by remembering, time is not something you spend. It's something you direct. Attention is the true currency. Emotion is the true amplifier. Consciousness is the true observer. And if you walk through life ignoring your soul's signals, your collapse will reflect that noise. This is why the Stoics trained the mind every day to recall death, not to mourn it, but to sharpen the present. because the present in both physics and spirit is the only access point to truth. So ask yourself, not as a metaphor, but as an energetic diagnostic. What timeline are you collapsing into right now? If today was the end, is this the version of you you'd want to make permanent? Lao Tzu and the Tao of Impermanence. To Lao Tzu, life and death were not opposites. They were rhythms, two breaths of the same eternal exhalation. The sage does not resist them. He flows because he knows resistance is illusion and control is a rope tied to smoke. Life and death, ele escreveu, são dois aspectos da mesma existência. In the Tao, there is no struggle to hold on. There is only movement. The Tao does not explain. It guides, it allows, and it always returns. Where we see loss, the Tao sees transition. Where we feel fear, the Tao offers silence. Where we seek permanence, the Tao reminds us permanence is not the point. Alignment is. In the eyes of the Tao, nothing truly dies. It merely changes form. Water becomes vapor. Wood becomes flame. The body becomes soil. The Tao doesn't stop this. It embraces it. And this is what makes its wisdom so relevant to those who live in constant internal war, clinging to identity, fearing change, fighting impermanence as if stillness were a right. The soul aligned with the Tao is not afraid of death because it has already let go of what cannot stay. And when it lets go, it receives everything. In quantum terms, this is phase transition. When energy reaches a certain frequency, it reorganizes into a new state. Ice becomes water. Water becomes steam. In the same way, consciousness expands beyond the ego self when it stops trying to hold its shape. The ego says, I must stay. The Tao says, become. This is not surrender in defeat. It is surrender in alignment. It is the release of form so that essence can flow. And Lao Tzu, centuries before wave theory or quantum fluid dynamics, already knew, when you push against life, you harden. When you soften, you transcend. There is a concept among mystics called dying before you die. Lao Tzu lived this principle. It means letting go of attachments while you are still alive. It means losing your addiction to being right, being known, being in control. It means allowing parts of your identity to dissolve, not because you are giving up, but because you are remembering that identity is not your essence. It is merely the shape your essence took for a time. This kind of death, the death of the false self, is the only kind that brings true freedom, because when it dies, the soul breathes. The Western mind resists this. We were trained to build, to define, to hold. We worship form and permanence. We cling to the illusion that meaning comes from duration. But the Tao laughs at our clocks. In the Tao, a single moment of pure being is worth more than a lifetime of pretending. A leaf falling in silence carries more truth than years of noise. And it teaches. The more you try to force life, the more it slips through your hands. But if you trust, if you flow, if you let go, life begins to move through you instead of around you. To remember death in the Taoist way is not to be afraid of disappearing. It is to realize you were never separate to begin with. You were not the wave. You were the ocean forming the wave for a time. The wave may fall, but the ocean remains. This dissolves fear. It doesn't remove grief, but it replaces despair with reverence. You begin to understand. Everything you love will change form, but nothing real is ever truly lost. Energy is never destroyed. The soul is never broken. The Tao does not lose track of what it creates. So what does this mean in your life right now in this moment? It means that the death of a season, a role, a relationship, a version of yourself is not an end. It is an opening. The Tao is not asking you to give up. It is inviting you to realign, to soften the places where you've become rigid, to loosen the grip where fear told you to hold on tighter, to breathe, to remember, to become again. If you were to die today, would your soul carry the weight of everything it tried to control, or would it rise unburdened because it had already learned how to release? That's the question the Tao asks without asking. That's the transformation Lao Tzu whispers without speaking. And when you finally stop resisting the dance, you become the dancer. You become the music. you become the flow. Bhagavad Gita, the soul that never dies. In the sacred verses of the Bhagavad Gita, death is not the end, nor is it a punishment. It is merely a change of garment. The body is described as clothing that the soul wears for a time, and when it grows old or torn, the soul discards it and puts on a new one. Just as a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, Krishna tells Arjuna, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. This is not mythology. It is metaphysics. It is the profound recognition that you are not your body, your name, your history, or your possessions. You are the one who witnesses all of that pass and yet remains. Where the Stoics spoke of the dignity of accepting fate, the Gita speaks of the immutability of the self, the Atman, as untouched by death, fire, water, or time. The soul is unborn, eternal, ever-existing and primeval, says Krishna. It is not slain when the body is slain. This is the voice of timeless wisdom, reminding us that the greatest illusion is to believe we are temporary, when in truth we are awareness itself, cloaked in matter. And from this perspective, the question shifts. It is no longer what happens after I die, but am I living in alignment with the part of me that cannot die? Arjuna, the warrior prince, stands paralyzed on the battlefield, not because he fears physical death, but because he fears what it means to act with clarity when the outcome is unknown. He fears taking a stand in the face of destruction, and Krishna's answer is unshaken. Act from your dharma, not from attachment. Live from the place in you that is already whole, already free, already eternal. And when you do, fear dissolves, confusion dissolves, identity dissolves. What remains is presence. What remains is consciousness aligned with the divine. This is where the Gita and Stoicism merge, in the refusal to be paralyzed by fear, in the choice to live with intentional alignment regardless of outcome. While the Stoics trained themselves to release attachment to comfort, status, and even life itself, the Gita invites you to release attachment to results. Do your work, Krishna says, but let go of the fruits. This is the deepest form of surrender, to act from truth, not from the hunger for reward or the fear of loss. And what does this have to do with death? Everything. Because the fear of death is, in essence, the fear of losing what we've attached ourselves to. But if the soul is eternal, and the body is just clothing, then what exactly are we losing? Only what was never ours to keep. Only what was borrowed for a chapter. The Gita reframes death not as something to resist, but as something to honor, a necessary transition in the soul's larger evolution. And when you see that, your relationship with life changes too. You stop trying to possess it. You begin to serve it. Imagine if you approached each moment with the awareness that your soul is eternal, that every experience is just a layer added to your vast journey. Suddenly, urgency becomes sacred. Smallness fades. Comparison dies. You no longer need to win, to prove, to conquer. You need only to remember who you are beyond this form, and to live from that memory. Because in that remembrance, alignment happens, and in alignment, fear has no grip. So if you were to die today, what would your soul carry? Would it carry the weight of unresolved desires and distractions, or would it carry the lightness of a life lived from essence? Would it rise free of regret because you loved deeply, served sincerely, and remembered your origin? The Gita does not want you to escape the world. It wants you to enter it fully, but as the soul, not the shell. As the eternal one, not the temporary costume. That's how you live aligned. Not by doing everything perfectly, but by anchoring yourself in what cannot be destroyed. Death, then, is not exile. It is homecoming. And life, when lived from the soul, becomes the preparation for that return. Neuroscience of mortality awareness. Something changes in the human brain the moment it remembers its own finitude. It's not just psychological, it's biological. Studies in neuroscience have shown that the awareness of death, what researchers call mortality salience, triggers shifts in brain regions responsible for meaning-making, emotional regulation, and decision-making. When we face the reality that time is limited, the mind begins to reorganize. Priorities rewire, gratitude intensifies, superficial desires lose color, the noise fades. What remains is an almost involuntary pull toward what truly matters. The amygdala, which governs emotional responses, quiets when you move from fear of death to acceptance. The prefrontal cortex, which supports higher reasoning, lights up when people reflect on their legacy or spiritual purpose. It's as if the brain, once it grasps the certainty of its end, begins preparing for a different kind of life, one that's not just longer, but deeper. From a scientific perspective, contemplating death increases activity in the default mode network, the system tied to self-awareness and introspection. You literally begin to see yourself differently, and that changes everything. But there's something even more profound. Mortality awareness collapses decision latency. It makes you choose faster, clearer, with less hesitation. Because when you realize there's no endless runway, you stop circling. You land. You say what you were afraid to say. You walk away from what drains you. You start the thing you've postponed for years. Your brain, confronted with death, opens a portal to courage. It reduces tolerance for delay. And this biological mechanism is a gift, not to be feared, but to be used. To remember death is to sharpen the mind and soften the heart. It trains you to listen more closely to the soul's voice, the one that's been whispering under the static. And neuroscience meets philosophy right here. Seneca said we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Neuroscience confirms it. Much of our suffering comes from anticipatory circuits, the brain's tendency to simulate worst-case futures. But when you integrate death into your awareness, you stop projecting so far ahead. You return to the present, the sensory now, where suffering is usually much smaller than the idea of it, and in this presence, the mind regulates itself. The parasympathetic nervous system activates. You breathe deeper. You begin to live from rest, not reaction. When you acknowledge death, your reward system shifts too. Dopamine, the neurochemical of desire, begins to respond more to experiences of awe, connection, meaning, and beauty, and less to shallow novelty or external validation. You begin to crave depth, not because someone told you to be spiritual, but because your neurobiology is guiding you back to coherence. You want fewer distractions. You want more stillness. You want to feel awake. You want to feel real. And that longing doesn't come from the ego. It comes from the brain remembering what it was built for. Survival, yes, but also transcendence. And so, contemplating your death isn't just some poetic act. It's a neurological recalibration. It quiets the false self. It boosts emotional clarity. It aligns decision-making with meaning. And from a quantum perspective, it prepares your field for coherence, because clarity collapses timelines faster. The less divided your mind is, the more direct your frequency becomes. You begin to attract not from confusion, but from resonance. Death, then, becomes the tool that strips away distortion. The brain, faced with it, begins organizing itself around truth. So now ask yourself, what would your brain begin to let go of if it truly accepted that your time here is not guaranteed? What mental patterns would dissolve? What urgency would return? What clarity would surface? And more importantly, why wait for a diagnosis, a tragedy, or a final breath to begin that rewiring? Your mind is capable of reorganizing now. You just have to give it the signal. And sometimes the most powerful signal is the remembrance that none of this is permanent. And that's precisely what makes it sacred. Quantum view, death as transition of frequency. From the perspective of quantum physics, nothing truly disappears. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It only transforms. The self you think you are, the body you inhabit, the story you've lived, all of it is movement. All of it is vibration. What we call death is not the end of the signal. It is the shift of its frequency, a phase transition. The same way ice becomes water and water becomes vapor, the essence of who you are does not cease. It reorganizes. It transcends the visible form. And in that moment of transition, what matters is not what you had or what you did. What matters is the vibration you leave behind, The quantum field responds not to form, but to resonance. It doesn't care about status or numbers. It listens to coherence. And coherence is what happens when your inner world, your thoughts, your emotions, your actions, vibrate in alignment with your soul. Every human being emits a frequency, and that frequency either harmonizes with higher fields of love, truth, and presence, or it creates distortion. The death of the body is simply the last note in the symphony. But what melody were you playing while you were here? This is not a metaphor. In quantum systems, when enough coherence is reached, the system undergoes a shift, a spontaneous reconfiguration known as a phase transition. Suddenly, water freezes. Suddenly, light bends. Suddenly, a new state emerges. Death is this moment. And if you've lived in fear, attachment, or resentment, that will be the frequency that stabilizes at the collapse, not as punishment, but as physics. The field always reflects your signal. It always has, and it always will. So the question becomes deeply practical. What frequency are you broadcasting right now? Not in theory, but in your breath, your thoughts, your unspoken emotions. Are you vibrating at resistance or at surrender, at doubt or at trust, at fear or at love? Because whatever frequency you inhabit, that becomes the tone of your transition. And the universe, in all its elegance, will continue your waveform in the dimension that matches your state. Marcus Aurelius believed that to live with virtue is to live in alignment with nature. In quantum language, virtue is coherence. It is the state of inner resonance where you no longer generate noise in the field. Your presence harmonizes. Your being becomes a tuning fork. You collapse possibilities not from chaos but from clarity, and when death comes, it simply lifts the veil. It reveals the song you've been singing all along. This is why mystics across traditions spoke of preparing for death, not by waiting for it, but by tuning your life toward beauty, truth, and presence. Because to die well is not to avoid pain. It is to meet the final transformation with the vibration that opens doors instead of closing them. You do not ascend by avoiding life. You ascend by harmonizing with its highest order. And perhaps this is what the Stoics sensed in their reflections on fate. That our choices, our attitudes, our inner states, these are not small details. They are fields of influence, and the moment of death is not a termination. It is an integration. You take with you nothing but your frequency, not your name, not your legacy, just your resonance, the weight of your being. So if you could feel your own vibration as a sound right now, what would it be? Would it feel tense or free? Would it feel heavy or luminous? Would it expand outward, touching the lives of others? Or would it collapse inward, tangled in fear? These are not abstract questions. They are your living blueprint, and the field is always listening. Every moment is a rehearsal for your final transmission. Every breath is a note. When you shift from seeing death as an enemy to seeing it as a frequency transition, you no longer fear it. You begin to shape it. With presence, with love, with coherence. You prepare not to escape, but to arrive. Identity shift. Living as if already dying. The moment you remember that you're going to die, something ancient awakens inside you. Not fear, clarity, a deeper intelligence that no longer tolerates lies, not the lies you tell others, the ones you tell yourself. Death, when fully remembered, doesn't depress you. It strips you. It takes away everything that is not essential. It peels back the masks. It dissolves the performance. It burns the costumes. What's left is something quieter, rawer, more true. A self no longer trying to be seen, but finally willing to be real. Epictetus said we must practice death daily, but he wasn't asking you to fantasize about endings. He was asking you to die before you die. To die to the roles, the fears, the expectations, the identities that were never really yours. Because it is only when the false self dies that the soul can breathe. This is not a metaphorical death. It's psychological. It's emotional. It's spiritual. It's neurological. You begin to shift from the identity that was built by conditioning to the identity that was formed by truth, and that shift, repeated daily, becomes your liberation. In the quantum model of consciousness, every possible version of you already exists. The successful one, the wise one, the one that speaks truth, the one that avoids it, the one that lives aligned, the one that dies distracted. They all exist as potential frequencies in the field. But the version that becomes real, that becomes embodied, is the one you consistently choose, not with words, with attention, with repetition, with action, with state. When you live as if you are already dying, you stop feeding the versions of you that are based on fear, and you start inhabiting the one that would have nothing to regret if today was the last breath. This is why the practice of living as if you are already dying is not about preparing for death. It's about reclaiming life, because most people don't live, they rehearse, they perform, they delay. They wait for permission to be authentic. They wait for certainty to speak. They wait for validation to rest. But the soul doesn't wait. The soul doesn't perform, it doesn't play roles, it vibrates. And that vibration either aligns with who you really are, or it doesn't. To shift your identity is to shift your frequency. And that shift is not abstract, it is felt. It is in your posture, in your breath, in the way you walk into a room, in the way you hold a conversation, in the energy you bring when no one is watching. To live as if you are already dying is to ask constantly, what would matter if today was the end? What would I say? Who would I forgive? What would I no longer pretend to care about? And something powerful happens when you begin to live like this. You become impossible to manipulate. You become immune to the games of the world. You stop bargaining with your worth. You stop measuring yourself by systems that were never built for your soul. You begin to recognize that your only task is alignment, not success, not applause, not control, but coherence. And the world around you begins to respond differently. Opportunities feel drawn to you. Connections deepen. Even silence becomes sacred. Because your energy is no longer split between who you are and who you're pretending to be. The most awakened beings are not always the loudest. Often, they are the ones who have made peace with death while still fully alive. They are the ones whose identities are no longer armor but mirrors, reflecting truth, not hiding from it. And this identity, this version of you that remembers it is temporary, paradoxically becomes the most grounded, because it no longer fears falling apart. It has already let go, and in that letting go it becomes a vessel for clarity, for presence, for power. So ask yourself now, what version of you would remain if you stopped performing, if you stopped proving, if you stopped running? Who would you be if your death wasn't a fear in the distance, but a whisper in your ear, asking you to return to your essence? Collective awakening, how our death shapes the whole. When we speak of death, we often imagine it as a solitary experience, personal, silent, ours alone. But this too is an illusion. Your death, like your life, is not separate. It echoes. It imprints. It reorganizes the field far beyond what your eyes can see. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we are all threads in the same tapestry, and if you pull one thread, the entire fabric shifts. This is not just poetic, it is energetic, it is quantum, because in a unified field of consciousness, no life and no death occurs in isolation. Every thought you think, every act you take, every moment you live aligned, or not, contributes to the whole. In the quantum view, this is called entanglement. When two particles become entangled, their states remain linked no matter the distance. A change in one instantly affects the other, and if everything in this universe is made of the same fundamental particles, then nothing you are, nothing you do, nothing you become, ends with you. Your coherence influences the field. Your misalignment distorts it. Your liberation becomes a blueprint for others to remember their own. So when you die, your final vibration becomes not just a signature, but a transmission. And this is why your personal awakening is never just personal. It is participatory. It is evolutionary. You are not an island. You are a cell in the body of consciousness. When one cell heals, the immune system of the whole strengthens. When one soul chooses alignment, it becomes easier for others to do the same. This is how the morphic field works, the energetic memory of our species. Every act of courage, every surrender to presence, every breath taken with intention sends out a resonance. It tells the field, this is possible, this is real, this is safe now. The Stoics understood this in the language of duty. Marcus Aurelius believed that we live for the good of the whole, that we are not here merely to satisfy ourselves, but to serve the unfolding of the cosmos through our own self-governance. Epictetus taught that the role we are assigned is not ours to choose, but how we play it matters deeply. And Seneca urged us to see death not as the removal of our light, but as the point where our flame merges with something greater. Your final act, your death, is not the end of your contribution. It is the moment when everything you lived becomes energy in the field, and if you die misaligned, fragmented, in bitterness or fear, that echo enters the collective as residue. But if you die clear, coherent, aligned with your soul, your transition becomes medicine. It becomes memory encoded in the consciousness of others. It becomes a silent transmission that helps awaken the next seeker. And you may never know whose life your death will open, but the field will know, and it will never forget. This is why to remember death is not just a personal practice, it is a collective service. It cleans your frequency, it clarifies your choices. It makes you available to a deeper level of responsibility, not imposed by guilt or external duty, but chosen from love. The love of knowing that everything you heal in yourself sends light outward, that every layer of fear you dissolve makes it easier for someone else to be brave, that your life, when lived consciously, becomes a lighthouse in the fog of unconsciousness. To prepare for death, then, is to align your life so completely with your soul that when you leave this dimension, you do so as a gift to the next. Your final breath, rather than being a collapse, becomes a pulse that ripples into the field, a pulse that says, it is possible to live fully, it is possible to die free. And in a world drowning in noise, in performance, in disconnection, such a pulse matters. It matters more than you may ever see. Because it becomes part of the invisible architecture of awakening that others will step into long after your form is gone. You will be gone, yes, but not absent. Your frequency will remain, not as a memory but as a possibility now embedded in the field. And that possibility could be the very whisper that someone else hears just before they choose to live differently. So the question deepens. If you died today, what would your final vibration feed into the field? Would it harmonize the whole or add to its distortion? Would it become a song of truth or a silence filled with fear? These are not abstract reflections. They are your legacy in the quantum sense. Your impact is not measured in followers, in wealth, in achievements. It is measured in coherence, in the depth of alignment between your soul and your choices, and the world will feel it. Closing transmission, the call to alignment. Now you've heard it said that death is the great equalizer, but that's only half the truth. Death is not just what levels us, it is what reveals us. In the final silence, there are no masks, no justifications, no edits. There is only presence, and presence never lies. It reflects, with absolute clarity, who you really were beneath everything you pretended to be. It is the mirror held by the infinite, asking one simple question: did you live aligned? This isn't about perfection, it's about presence. Alignment doesn't mean never making mistakes. It means being awake enough to see when you've strayed and brave enough to return. And that return over and over again becomes the path. You're not being asked to be someone else. You're being called to remember who you were before you were told who to be. You're being invited to return to the frequency of your soul. That frequency is simple, it's quiet. It doesn't demand attention, it doesn't seek approval, it just is. And when you live from there, everything changes. Not always externally, but internally, fundamentally. Memento Mori is not a grim meditation. It is a sacred remembering, not of death, but of what matters. It is the sword that cuts through distraction, the fire that burns illusion, the bell that calls you back when you've drifted too far from yourself. The truth is, you don't know when your last breath will come, but you do know this one has come. And that's enough. It's always enough, because this moment contains the entire field of possibility. It is the collapse point, the singularity, the now. And from here, alignment is always one choice away. So, make the choice, not tomorrow, now. Let death be your compass. Let it pull you toward the real, the eternal, the essential. Strip away the roles, the performance, the posturing. Return to the stillness inside you, the voice beneath the noise, the light beneath the identity, the self that doesn't need fixing, only remembering. And ask from that place, if I died tonight, would I die aligned? Would I leave this world as a contribution or a question mark? This is not a fear-based prompt. It's a liberation. Because once you realize that death is not the enemy, misalignment is, you are free. Free to live, free to speak, free to create, free to rest, free to love without holding back. Because there is nothing to lose when everything you are is already eternal. So let this be your ritual, not once a year, every day. Look in the mirror and ask, is my life aligned? Does my presence radiate coherence or confusion? Am I collapsing realities that reflect my soul or my fear? This is the real practice. The real manifestation. Not just imagining the life you want, but embodying the self that would live it. If this video spoke to something deep within you, you're not alone. You were meant to hear it. And if it's time for you to walk this path of alignment with more clarity, more devotion, more courage, subscribe, comment, share. But not as a favor, as a declaration, as an energetic yes. A yes to presence, a yes to truth, a yes to living fully and dying free. Because when your final breath comes, may it echo with the vibration of a life fully lived. Not perfect, not popular, but aligned. This is your time, this is your moment, not to wait, but to remember, not to perform, but to embody. And if you ever forget, let death remind you.